talk through this.
So I will show you the traditional version of Parkinson's disease that we typically see, and what you are probably aware of in the papers that we have published. So typically in Parkinson's disease, you do see this prominent tremor in the eye movements. We do see that in yours, but it's very subtle. You can see it here in the vertical direction, very small. If I zoom in on this, it does become more prominent. And this is, let me see, right in the realm of about 9 hertz frequency. Very small from the distance you're sitting. Something of this size would not affect your vision at all. You shouldn't have any visual complaints because of this, but if we did formal testing, you might notice some very subtle things. And we do find, as people progress, this does tend to become slower and larger. So you may start to have visual complaints one day, 15, 20 years down the road. You're not going to have them right now. That's the primary feature that we see in Parkinson's disease. The other thing that's always noted previously is on that tick-tock volitional saccadic task. When you do predict it, you undershoot considerably, about 50% undershoot, which is normal, and only when you're predicting the target. When you're reacting to it, they're large, full amplitude movements. So both of those features are consistent with Parkinson's, what we typically see. Going back to vascular, that's a whole different set of symptoms that usually there's very little to no overlap. You're familiar with main sequence data as far as the relationship between amplitude and peak velocity. Normally that follows a very tight, narrow curve. In vascular disease, what you see is that as the saccades get larger, the variability of peak velocity just goes very, very wide. So instead of having a little range of 50 degrees per second at a certain amplitude, you'll start to see 200 degrees per second of variability at the same amplitude.
And that's what you see here.
And we do see that here. The other thing, in addition to that, is that...
Where do you see that? Just curious.
So that would be when you look at actual saccades. I'm looking at the range here of amplitude versus peak velocity is what I'm typically looking at, and the consistency. And what we see in vascular disease is that they become, I call it consistently inconsistent. They're not as predictable as they would be in a normal subject or in somebody with another disease.
Right.
The vascular is just, you get a bit more noise.
And Dr. Wetzel has formulated that, right? In terms
yes,
of...
that should be formulated in there as
right.
well. And that's also partially on my end.
What you've got to get out.
As far as the translation,
yeah.
get out, right. Another thing that we do see in vascular disease quite regularly is the way that saccades are terminated. Something that is not really ever formally looked at in any meaningful way. But if you look at, if you zoom way in and see how the saccade is terminated, there is a peaked overshoot and a return to intended position. Sometimes you'll even see a little bit of ringing where it'll overshoot, undershoot, and return back and forth. And this is a highly dynamic, unpredictable type of behavior. But we see this consistently in everybody with vascular disease with small vessel strokes.
And you saw it with me.
That's it right there.
That's it right there. When you blew it out.
So ideally, because we can go back and find normal saccades like these, especially at smaller ones, where they just kind of get to the correct position and stop. But as saccades become larger, they're you do see peaked overshoots with glossotic returns. Another feature of vascular disease, a lot of times you get cross-coupling in the vertical direction. So you can see the little dip here. So instead of a purely horizontal saccade, they'll fluctuate during flight. And those are little things that, again, why I relied on manually looking at everything is that any automated system is not going to pick that up. You also run into issues.
So how do we solve for that in the finished product?
So this is reasonably easy to do, and should be able to programmatically do quite well.
Okay.
But I'll show you. Let me go back to another good example. So that's not a great one, but we ran into issues with one of our other eye trackers where there was a huge amount of artifact on the termination of the saccade. I'm just looking for a good example for you here for the camera.
What's the definition of a saccade?
A saccade is basically a very fast eye movement when your eyes jerk from one point to another and kind of reorienting your gaze. So here's a good enough example. When you're looking at an algorithmic approach of analyzing eye movements and calculating velocity and main sequence data and looking at this consistency, in the case of this saccade, what's the amplitude? Does it stop here, or does it stop here? You know, it was programmed for this size, but then overshot too far. And also, same thing with duration. Does it actually end here when it gets to correct position, or is it back here at the end of flight? So Dr. Wetzel has done extensive analysis of all of this and has that written into his algorithms. So it's based on position, velocity, and acceleration, three-factor to get to a correct approximation of true saccade flight. So that's, again, one of the more important things that we see in vascular disease. Another thing that I will pick up here that not quite as easy to visualize, but if we look at this initial task, it was a 1-minute recording and you had 18 blinks, which we see in vascular disease, blinks are significantly increased, up to the point where we'll reach 90
Even
to
though
100.
I kept contacts because I
Even
wet my eyes by
And you have
blinking.
norms for that?
with Jim, yeah. So we have norms for that. Typical people, most will range 8 to 10 blinks per minute. You're hitting about 18 blinks per minute, which we do seem significantly increased in vascular disease.
And we measure blink rate already.
Perfect. In Parkinson's disease, if you had just Parkinson's, you could go through that entire 5-minute test and not blink a single time. And that's what we typically see in
So
pure
that's
Parkinson's.
so you saw the 18
Yeah.
blinks and you said there's something else.
Right. That alone.
But just because you have a high blink rate doesn't mean you don't have Parkinson's.
Correct.
It just means you might have something
Well,
else.
Lisa
You could have
said-
dry eye.
Right. Exactly.
Lisa
the blink rate
says-
is a supportive feature. It's not. Blink rate is never a diagnostic feature.
Right.
But it
Does
is
blink
supportive.
duration mean anything? Because we do measure that as
We
well.
haven't looked at it formally,
Okay.
but it certainly could. It certainly could.
Or Lisa says that sometimes she'll see me staring.
Okay.
That's non-blinking.
Right.
Right.
And she'll say
That's
to me,
Parkinson's.
blink.
Right. And that is the Parkinson's, absolutely.
And that's the Parkinson's. And
Especially
that's
in
what
the
Deet
medicated-
said too.
Especially when you're not
Not
medicated.
medicated,
Yeah,
especially in that case. I would venture to say 40% of our patients with Parkinson's sit through this entire test and not blink a single time.
yeah. So that's an indicator.
It can be, yeah. I don't think that it's as strong because it's not
So
purely.
you wouldn't
oculomotor.
include that in the.
It is supportive.
Maybe you put it in the report, but you don't.
Right.
It's not as meaningful.
It is supportive, and I think for our purposes moving forward, I think it would be worth putting in, absolutely. I think that I got so deep in the weeds of purely ocular motor function, since it's not a hard finding, ocular
Yeah.
motor, I kind of put it to the side.
But if they're norms, it's just
Absolutely,
another
yeah.
piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. Yeah. So those are the major things that I see
Okay.
here.
Should I stop recording now?
Yeah, you can. I was wanted to see if there was anything on Smooth Pursuit. Usually
Yeah, that
this
would
is
be good.
less helpful typically for me. But you do have some issues with Smooth Pursuit here. Reduced gain, increased number of corrections, which I normally wouldn't see with pure Parkinson's disease. That can also be supportive of vascular disease, but it's not as reliable. So I wouldn't necessarily include that in my differential at the moment,
Okay.
but certainly helpful. And you can actually see the tremor at this point is a little bit more prominent. Instability in the vertical direction is more prominent here. So largely that's what I would base this on.
Okay. Thank you.